Hello and welcome to another episode of Brand Retro. We are going to have Dan Jurgens back, and we are going to talk about the brand of Superman, the Superman brand. For those of you who don't know, there is another podcast out there with Dan, kind of introducing who Dan is and some of how I know Dan and how we've worked together. But for those of you who don't know, Dan is a very accomplished creator, writer, and artist for such companies as DC Comics, Marvel Comics. He's done an amazing plethora of amazing titles from Flash Gordon, Green Arrow, Superman, Justice League, Booster Gold, including the best-selling Death of Superman, which he actually won an award for that one for the National Cartoonist Society in Best Comic Book Division. So he's very accomplished, very well known in the industry. I wanted to bring him in to talk to me and talk with me about the Superman brand, because one of the things you'll hear me talk about over and over again to my customers, and even if you've ever had a conversation or listened to my podcast, is that you don't have to have $1 million brand to look like $1 million brand. So yeah, it helps. I mean, budgets help. These kinds of things help. But I always try to tell my customers to think bigger, and let's talk about how can we make this brand huge, and how can we inject these different points of interest and these different points of authenticity so that it makes the brand something of substance. And obviously now it seems like such an obvious thing that the Superman brand, obviously, that's a brand. It's Superman. He's huge. But it didn't start that way, right? It started out as a simple comic book title, a simple comic book character, and over time has become, one of the fabrics of what we do and what we're used to seeing on a day-to-day basis throughout our lives, seeing Superman products at Target or Walmart or whatever it is. I would say Nike, Coca-Cola, Superman, they're all on the same level. It's a very powerful thing. And I doubt that most people stop to realize that this comic book character and the S and the blue tights, red cape, these have been, things that have been ingrained in our minds, because Superman as a brand is a very powerful thing. So Dan's going to join us today and talk a little bit about that, a little bit about the history behind his involvement with Superman, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So Dan, here we go. I'd like to welcome to the podcast Dan Jurgens, and what I want to talk about is the Superman brand and the fact that it is a brand. I think people that have grown up with Superman, they grow up with, whether it's Spider-Man, Superman, whatever it is, they grow up with these things and they just exist, right? And we don't think about them as a Coca-Cola or a Nike. And Superman very much is a commodity. It's very much a brand. When anybody says blue tights, red cape, what do you think of?
Right.
You think of Superman. So I want to talk a little bit about you obviously have a very deep and rich history with Superman. So I want to get some of your insight, but I kind of want to talk about the birth of, the death of, and just kind of trade some perspectives on that, and then we'll proceed.
Okay, sounds good.
So for me, I was very young, December 1978, when the Superman movie came out. I know Superman's been around a lot longer than that,
Mhm.
but for me, that was the birth of Superman. What was it for you? When did you realize what Superman is and what the impact would be on you for your whole career?
Well, for me, it's a little different because when I was a kid, the big superhero was Batman, and that is because the Adam West Batman TV series was on at that time, and I'm talking not like after school reruns. It was prime time for me, and first run on TV, and we as kids all used to watch that show. We thought it was awesome. So one night I was walking through my neighborhood and there were a couple of older guys sitting out on their front stoop and they were reading comic books. I didn't even know comics existed at that time, but they had a bunch of Batman comics. And I thought, wow, here's this guy who's on TV a couple nights a week is also in these magical comic books they were fun and vivid and colorful and everything. So I said, well, I've got to go out and buy some for me. And went down to the local drugstore, a couple of days later and was looking for Batman comics. They didn't have any, But I picked up a Superman comic book for all of 12 cents, got my mom to throw it in the cart so she could buy it with the other stuff. And so the first comic I ever bought was a Superman comic. And I think I kind of knew of the character, but that was the first real exposure. And I started reading it then. And then there was a Superman cartoon on Saturday mornings, not long after that. So my exposure to the character kind of came through Batman, and I was hooked from the start. And a lot of it was, I think, because of the difference where, Batman was a normal guy driving around in this hot car, whereas Superman could fly, he could move mountains, he could pick up an ocean liner, stuff like that, which was more visual. And even as a kid, as a 7-year old, I was always interested in art. And I think I was attracted to that sense of visual drama with the character. And you're right, it's that red cape and that blue suit and that familiar um, red and yellow S shield that everybody recognizes throughout the world that attracted me to it. I mean, you draw a triangle, put an S in it, and everyone knows that stands for Superman.
Yep.
That's pretty iconic. So I think I was attracted to that from the start. And then years later, when I was in comics and got the chance to write and draw the character, you kind of at that point go back to that 7-year-old kid in you and try and find out what attracted to me to that character, what worked for me, and how do I bring that sense of magic to that character now.
Well, first of all, do you remember what that comic was, that first one?
Yeah, I do. I can't remember the exact issue number. I think it was like Superman 183, and the comic got thrown out. Years later, of course, I went out and bought an entirely new copy. But I still remember. There are times in my life where I remember looking at a comic book rack and seeing covers that I liked and just had that so enticed me that I had to buy it. And on that one, it really was, it was Superman standing on a planet where it looked like it was, a catastrophe had hit, and his dog Crypto was barking at him on the cover. And it's like he's thinking, Crypto hates me. Why? And I thought, well, why would Superman's dog hate him? I better read this. So, and that's kind of that 7-year-old mentality at that point. And so, yeah, I got into it then. And the idea that what you could always tell with Superman is much bigger stories than you could tell with Batman. And that's what attracted me as a writer.
So when you got a chance to actually work on, draw, whatever, did that 7-year-old kid in you come out? Did it like blow your mind? Because that had to be something that you maybe didn't even fathom as a reality,
Yeah, definitely. And when you draw a book or you draw a project, there's another writer in theory who's doing it. And so the content is their responsibility, right? And what you're just trying to do is make the best possible visual of it. When I started writing Superman, I first started as an artist, and then I started writing the character shortly after. That to me is even more intimidating because as an artist, really you are trying to dramatize the story and make it as visually interesting as possible. As a writer, you have much more that responsibility of being true to the character, true to the property, and making something of it. And I've always said that Superman first showed up in 1938. So by the time I started on the character, it was right around his 50th anniversary, or very shortly after that. And you don't want to screw up 50 years of history. Your job is really to look at it, I think, as a very ornate tapestry. And by the time you get done, you've added another foot to the bottom of that tapestry that's hanging on the wall. And you need it to match, you need it to be part of the blend, and hopefully add to it and augment it, and not all of a sudden be the guy who went in and stitched a solid black bar across the bottom that doesn't match the top. I'm probably not explaining it well, but you're there to add to it. And it should be, when you leave, better for having had you. The property should be enriched, and it should be something that just really made it better.
Yep. No, dude, I think you nailed it as far as the description, because I'm listening to you, I'm understanding what you're saying, I'm with you, but I'm also thinking about it from a brand and marketing perspective, which is what I do. And I'm thinking that's exactly right. Anytime I've stepped into or worked with an existing brand, whether it was a Harley Davidson or a Dan Jurgens or whatever, I'm always trying to respect everything that came before me. And yes, we're here to do a job, we're here to evolve, we're here to change, but how do I not kind of do a disservice to what's already been done or make it better? So no,
Right.
I think you nailed that. And your description of kind of what that pressure is to you exactly kind of defines the reason why it's a brand.
Yeah. And
um
what I see so often is people come in and they want to update something. And whether it's update the look of the character, the feel of the character, whatever it might be. And if you go too far with that, to me, you can easily destroy the character. And I actually see that happen all the time. The idea is to update and add to the core of the character, build on that cornerstone that exists within a property or a brand and add to that and not just move it away so far from what originally was that is no longer recognizable
yeah.
as what it should be, which I actually see happen all the time.
Yep, and I would completely agree. I see it in my industry as well, where people want to make their mark on something, but at the expense of the property, not themselves. And it's like you have to. We all should kind of seek creativity and try to move the needle, but not at the expense of the client or the brand. I think it's so common because I think as artists too, we want to break the mold sometimes, but we got to have the self control of knowing when to do it and when not to do it as well. So one thing I wanted to share with you, and I know the listeners will not be able to see this, but I came across this brand book, which is a Superman brand book.
Hmm.
So when I was working in retail, I met with this agency out of Minneapolis, and basically the story they shared this with me, and I'm like, what is this? Well, when they made the Superman Returns movie in 2006, and I know I probably should have mentioned Bryan Singer since he's under hot water these days, but one of the things he did with the staff and everybody, the actors and anybody that was on that movie, is he had this brand book created by a local agency in Minneapolis. And it actually defines, it's really cool. I'll bring it to a con next time I see you, but it's a total brand book about the Superman brand, the images that it, kind of ignites. And it's just a super cool, kind of a rare piece. And the fact that it was connected to that movie, I thought was super cool. So my question is when you come into the industry and you jump into a project like this, like a brand style guide, so to speak, in the marketing world, is there something that they give you that's like, hey, here's your boundaries? Or are you expected to just learn that, know that, and understand it in its full capacity?
There are different answers to that. It isn't always the same. I have had situations where I have worked on something and they've given me materials to say, this is sort of the look we want you to go for. This is the feel we want you to have. But the other part of it is this, and that is, as writers and artists, we are hired for the individual flair that our styles bring to it, right? And that is, so really kind of people know how I draw. So based on my published work. So they might say, we want you to draw this uh, kind of staying true to the character, but we want that Dan Jurgens flair. Same thing from a writer's standpoint, where they'll say, this often has gone too far astray. Would you be interested in coming and working on this and perhaps bringing it back or pushing it more in this direction, whatever it might be? And so the interesting thing about your question to me, Mike, is that it really is some of both. It is saying, we have these pre-existing characters. Sometimes they want great change. Other times they want to pull back. Other times they just want to maintain something that they have. But it's always within the context of my own style, be it a writing style or an artistic style. And that, I think, is what you want to have.
Yeah. So I think about some of the game changers like a Todd McFarlane or somebody that really kind of twisted the style to some degree and then it became a positive. But when he first started doing it, it was probably like, what are you doing? That's not how you draw Spider-Man, or
Right.
something like that. It became his own thing. It became his personal brand. It became his style, which then became, an accentuation of the brand he's working on.
Yeah, yeah, it's
So
very true. And yeah, and every now and then there have been these revolutionary artists who have come along and put pencil to paper with that character and just pushed it so far into their own direction that that then becomes the iconic style of the moment for those characters. And those moments in comics are few and far between in a way, but when they do happen, they're magic. And it ends up becoming, every bit as important in that character's development over time as their original creation. So, it's always fun to see that happen.
yeah, and we don't have to talk about it, but Alex Ross would be one that I would throw out there. Like the stuff that he does, just that would have melted my brain at 9 years old.
Oh, of
Like
course.
the realism and the different things. And I know he uses human studies and whatnot, but like it's next level. It's really cool stuff.
Yeah, very true.
So tell me a little bit, and I know this is a deep topic. We don't have to go totally in the weeds. People can Google it and get the backstory if they'd like to. But how prolific was the death of Superman for you? I know, I know the story of when it came out and the hype. I think it came out in January of '93 or that fall. If
It
I'm not
was November of '92.
okay,
Yeah.
so I know when it came out. I remember the lines at the comic stores. I remember it being a little bit of a, it was a hype wheel around it. It was a huge thing. But for the guy who was on the inside, did you know what you were getting yourself into, or did you anticipate that it would become what it is today?
No, you can't possibly anticipate that kind of a reaction. And, the thing about it is that, we wanted to do a story called The Death of Superman because we thought, it would be a fun story to do, but also because we realized if you think of things like that in your own personal life, when someone dies, and perhaps you're at the memorial service or whatever, or just talking to a mutual acquaintance about it or family, that is when you really stop to consider how much that person may have meant to you or the impact that they made in your community or whatever. And so what we realized is if we were going to do a story called The Death of Superman, we had to use it to talk about Superman's overall importance to the world. And we did that within the context of our stories. How do the rest of the heroes react to it, whether it's Batman or Robin or Wonder Woman or Martian Manhunter or whomever? How do they react to it? How do Clark Kent's parents react to it? How does Lois Lane and Perry White, how do they react to it? We had Bill Clinton deliver a bit of a eulogy in the story. He was president at the time. How does he react? How does the nation react? And the funny thing about that is that so we had that as part of our stories, while at the same time, across the country, there were columnists who wrote stories or opinion pieces rather that kind of said, what does it mean that we as a society no longer have Superman? What does it mean that those evil writers took him away from us? What does it say about us? So, in what happened is we had this really cool thing going where reality and fiction kind of met up for a bit, where we were saying, here's the reaction of people in our stories. And that reaction was playing out in live time in the marketplace as people brought that up as well. So it was very unique. It's something you'll never be able to get back. It's something we couldn't have possibly foreseen. But whether the media cycle was just right or because there wasn't a massive earthquake in Beijing or wherever, I mean, the news was able to come through and the news organizations were able to spend time on it, which kind of fueled our story. And I think people became interested, really interested, because again, those are the themes that we were dealing with in the story. We were basically saying to readers, we're talking about you here. We're talking about your reaction to Superman being gone. wrapped in the context of this giant adventure.
It got personal real quick. That's the part that I remember. I was 18 at the time, I believe, but I just remember it got personal real quick. Like comic books were always, at the time, like, if you're a nerd, you'd read comics and whatever, and it was kind of its own thing. But when Superman, the death of Superman came out and Superman essentially died, it kind of made him a real person. And then it's on CNN and it's on all these different channels. And you're like, why do all these people care if they're not comic people? But it was such a cultural kind of a closing of a chapter, so to speak, that I think it just kind of spun people out, because I think it's kind of that whole thing where, like you said, when a real death occurs, you don't necessarily think people are going to live forever, but you don't anticipate the day they're gone either.
Right. And it really is at that moment that you think about them and examine their importance. And that's really what we built around. And in addition to that, for everybody who said, well, Superman is not going to stay dead, he'll come back, blah, blah, blah. We then came back and we had four different characters, each claiming to be Superman. So even through that, because of the differences among the characters, we were addressing the concept of who Superman is. So, years later, it has been adapted into a couple of different animated movies. The movie Batman versus Superman really dealt with that exact same scenario. And I think that the idea that it has become this iconic moment in Superman's life and one of his most famous stories, which then gives us these adaptations, really goes to what I was talking about earlier, which is, when you work on these characters that are these tremendous icons, you can really add to them somehow and find the core of them and address that. And that's what that story did.
Was there ever a moment in that where you're like, oh my God, I killed Superman? Like, what am I doing? Like, was it
You
ever,
know,
did you feel that pressure at all?
yeah. Yeah, well, and it's not in past tense of, "Oh my god, I killed the Superman." It is more as you're working on the story and actually it's one thing to sit around in a room with other writers and artists, some incredibly talented people, and conceive of the story and start to assemble the framework as to how it would unfold. But it's another thing entirely to have it on your drawing board where you've written the story and are drawing it, and you want it to have this sense of emotional impact, right? So Superman is fighting this monster called Doomsday. They kind of knock each other over. Then Lois rushes and picks Superman up as he's dying and is kind of holding him in her lap and everything. And it's like you want that to have emotional impact, and the only way you can do that is to draw something where you feel that impact yourself, and you hope that it translates in the page. And then as you're working on that, I was anyway, kind of going like, wow, I'm drawing this triple page fold out, and yeah, this is something, and this is real. This is going to get printed. So, and people are going to see it and they're going to read it. And how will they react?
Was
And
the
the hard thing is once you get it drawn, it's another 2 months before it hits the stands.
Yeah, did you know that he'd always come back, or was that kind of a reaction of kind of how the media took it?
At
Or was
that
it always
time,
part of the plan?
no, at that time, there was no definitive plan on exactly when he would come back and how. I think what we never said Superman is dead and gone forever and will never be seen again. We were very careful about that and never said that. What we did say is yes, Superman dies, and we also said we don't have a plan for bringing him back, and that was very, very true. And it was only after we had killed him and the world had gone nuts that we got together, and our editor, who was Mike Carlin, fantastic editor, said, okay, the whole world is watching. We have to do good and we have to make this really good. And then the pressure was really on because, yes, when we first did it, as we wrote it and drew it, we did not have a plan exactly as to how or when he would come back. And in fact, part of the cool illusion of it was that DC stopped publishing Superman comics for a few months. So all of a sudden, comic book retailers were looking at their order forms, and there were no Superman comics. It's like, whoa, are they really doing this? So that, yes, at that moment, we did not know how he was
Yeah.
going to come back.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I don't know how you'll feel about this, but as an 18-year-old kid, like that was like DC's new Coke. I was like, "What are you doing?"
Oh,
And
sure.
and then the fact that it wasn't on the shelf anymore, and there was no social media, there was no rumor mill, there was no place to really get the inside information at all. So you just kind of started to come to terms with the fact that I think that that's it. I don't know if he's coming back. I think that that's it. And I just remember like that was like the new Coke moment for me for like DC Comics. I was like, what are you doing? So like to see it play out, and now when I look back, I think it's kind of funny, but I remember at the time because whether you're a Minnesota Vikings fan or a Michael Jordan fan or whatever it is, you build such a loyalty towards that brand or that hero. For me, it was Superman. So for him to just be erased, it blew my mind, and I'm sure I wasn't alone in that. But it was kind of a different time, and not knowing, like you said, they were popping out these other stories that kind of connected back to, but
Hmm.
it didn't quench the thirst of what Superman was. So it was trying to figure out what's the next move, you know?
Right. And, the other part of it is you talked about social media, and it's true, certainly, obviously, that as we know it now, it did not exist then. The one thing I do remember, Mike, is if you think back to, we used to have something called CompuServe, which was for email type purposes, and your name was actually, I think, like a series of 11 digits or something like that. And there were CompuServe message boards. And I remember there were a few of those going that were dealing with this. And there were people who were saying, hey, yeah, I have an inside contact. I know somebody who knows somebody. And I know exactly when and how Superman is coming back because I was told how, and it's going to be this way or whatever. And I remember distinctly reading it and calling some of the other writers and saying, you got to check this out because we didn't know. We hadn't even talked about it. We had no plan at that point. And yet, and this is where I obviously started to learn that things on the internet can really be wrong. I saw people saying, I have a contact. I know how he's coming back, and this is it. So,
Yeah, but that's what's interesting about the internet, the way it is today is because whether the facts are true or not, it's just enough information to keep the hope alive. And I think for me at the time, because there was no internet, like the hope went down the drain like really fast, like week after week, month after month, when I'm like, okay, he's still not on the rack. What's going on?
right.
It was just it was, I mean, to pull off the death of Superman in today's age, I don't know would have been the same because there's so much media where back then it was pretty limited. So whatever it was, whatever DC said it was at the time, that's all we had. We just had to go with that information, and it wasn't much.
Yeah, I have said many times that there is no way that we could engineer the return of Superman with the surprises that we had then in today's world. That it's so much harder to keep a secret. And if nothing else, one of the printers might have had someone grab a book and throw it online or something 2 weeks before it was supposed to come out. I don't know, but I have said, and I firmly believe, there's no way we could have pulled that off in today's world with the same level of effectiveness that we did at that time.
Right. Yeah. And in today's world, like I'm not even saying even when they're right, it's probably an accident because the speculation, a lot of times these guys are good at speculating. And if the speculation turns into a reality at some point, it doesn't necessarily make the speculation correct. It just means you got lucky.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah. Well, I'll let you go, Dan, but thank you so much for being on here, talking with me about the Superman brand. Your insight and kind of the backstory behind it's fascinating to me because of my interest and kind of my history with comic book Superman and whatnot. But I think from a brand perspective and from a company perspective of, no matter what industry you're in, I just think there's a lot you can learn from a brand like Superman or Nike or whatever you want to study. I think there's an inherent gift and education that's built into that as to why people love brands, why they follow them, and why they support them the way they do, which makes careers for guys like me and you. So,
Yes, it does.
yeah.
Yes, it does.
All right. Well, with that, thanks again. I really appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure, Mike, and thanks again for all the work you did on the website. It's just been fantastic.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Have a good rest of your day. Wow, having Dan on this podcast was awesome. And I want to tell you guys, if you want to go out, kind of research some of the things we've been talking about here, the brand of Superman, the death of Superman, or even some of Dan's works, please be sure to check him out at danjurgens.com or follow him on Twitter at the Dan Jurgens. Also, one of the things we talked about a lot in this podcast is branding, how it connects back to the retro brand mindset, and how how we work with companies on not only maintaining that mindset, but how to cultivate it, how to freshen things up. And what if we've lost our way? What if we need to come back and find that joy and that exuberance, and find that piece that resonates with our customers again? How do we do that? Please be sure to listen to my podcast. Please be sure to share it and like, comment, help me get it out there so that people are hearing it, and then we get the word out there. And obviously from that, I would love to have conversations with those people about their brands, and even if it's just kind of shooting the breeze. So I'm interested. I geek out over that stuff, and I'd love to hear from anybody that's listening on how we can help them, or how we can just maybe BS or kind of shoot the breeze about their brand. So check us out at cyberdogsmarketing.com, and also check us out on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatnot. So thank you again, and we will talk to you soon.